Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to our article analysis program. I'm Fatma Zehra, the first year student of Psychology Department in Ibn Haldun University and the secretary of Psychology Club. I hope that you all are good and healthy. First of all, I would like to say thank you to our guests for accepting our invitation. And today we have Dr. Mercedes Sheen and from Harriet University and our professor, Professor Tim Jordan. Welcome again. First of all, Dr. Mercedes Sheen, welcome, and it's really nice to see you again. And second time.
Thank you.
And Professor, it's really great and great honor to have you.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you accepting for this. And before I move on the program, let me talk about the program flow. First of all, Ayşenur will introduce our guests to us, and after that, I will be reading the summary from the article to remember briefly what we are going to talk about. And then we will be listening to our guest speech briefly about their article, their thoughts, and the reasons why they chose this topic. And you're welcome to ask your questions. Please write your questions on chat, and we are gonna call you one by one to prevent the confusion. And also, we will ask our questions. So, dear Ayşenur, please introduce our guest to us.
Hello, guys. Welcome to the article analysis program, and welcome, dear professors, to our program. I'm Ayşenur Süme. I'm second year psychology student in Ibn Haldun University, and I'm vice chair in the psychology club. Okay, let me introduce you briefly about our professors. Associate Professor Dr. Mercedes Sheen. She received her PhD at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, for her work on false memories, in which she coined a new type of memory error called disputed memories, which resulted from many differing recollections about her shared past with her identical twin sister. Her main research interests now lie in the field of social cognition, and particularly in how it relates to perception of human facial attractiveness. Then she joined Harriet University, Dubai, in August 2019 and has taken over the role of academic head of psychology. And Professor Dr. Timothy Jordan, he was born in England, UK, and educated there throughout obtaining a first in psychology at the University of Reading. After his PhD and postdoctoral posts, his first faculty position was at the University of St. Andrews, and then professorial chairs at the University of Nottingham and the University of Leicester, before moving to take academic positions in the Middle East. Then he took the position of Professor of Cognition and Cognitive Neuroscience at Ibn Haldun University in 2019. So I guess we can hear from our professors why they choose the topic and talk about the articles. Or before, I guess Zehra will read the summaries, right?
Yes, Ayşenur. By the way, I've forgotten to say welcome to Dr. Mercedes students. Beyond Ibn Haldun University, we have at the same time them. So it's really nice to have you. Welcome again. And let me read the summary of the article, Believing is Seeing. And yes, for many years, the Shroud of Turin has been famous for images of a body and face which many believe were formed during the resurrection. More recently, however, claims have been made that the shroud also contains evidence of other objects, and these claims have been used to support the view that the shroud is the burial cloth of Jesus. However, these claims are based on marks that are barely visible and psychological process known to be involved in perceiving objects under data-limited conditions have been largely ignored. Here we consider these processes and assess the claims that objects can be seen on the shroud. We conclude that the viewing conditions provided by image of shroud are likely to lead to the illusory perception of objects, and knowing the psychological processes underlying this perception is crucial for accurately determining the provenance of the shroud and other material artifacts. Actually, I should have said that you, but I'm sorry, I read directly and I said we. Actually, you have done this. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Okay.
You did brilliantly.
Thank you. And the first question, if you want, we can start. What was that inspired you in the first place to do research on such an artifact? And how did you, as two professors of different fields, social psychology and neuropsychology, of psychology, decide to the research on it? Is it possible to us have its story as an introduction to the program?
Yeah, Mercedes and I have planned a small introduction to this. Okay, so always plan, everybody. Always plan what you're going to do before you come to these big events. So what I'm going to do is share a screen with you that shows you what the Shroud of Turin is, just in case some of you don't actually know. So this is from a lecture. Some of you may have had this from me, some of you probably haven't. But this is basically the image, this strange sort of yellow piece of material. This is the Shroud of Turin. And the Shroud of Turin, as you quite rightly said, is kept in the Vatican in Italy. And it's regarded as being the garment. It's a very big thing, several meters in size. And it's regarded as being the garment that wrapped Jesus of Nazareth when he was taken down from the cross on which he was crucified. Now I don't know if that happened, but what is amazing about this garment, about this artifact, is that it does seem to have images in there. And if you look at, I hope you can see the images on the screen, these are images that have been photographed from the shroud itself. And over the years, other pieces of information have been produced. And what now seems to be clear, no matter what your beliefs are, what seems to be clear is that there is the image of a man somehow embedded in this linen, this cotton material. And you can see the images here. I'll address images B and C in particular. So B is the front of the shroud and the back of the shroud, and you can see you've got the front of a male, and if you can see that the head is very much the stereotypical head of a Jesus image. It's got long hair, it's got a beard. It looks exactly as I think many representations of Jesus look like. And the back, well, the back is of the same male as far as we can tell. But don't forget the shroud wraps the body, which is why you get a front and a back image. But more recently, and even I think more interesting, is that with modern technology, the image in C over here on the right shows, I think it was an MRI scan, but it shows there's depth to the body. You can get three-dimensional information, even though this image is on just a flat piece of linen. So the whole picture, strangely, seems to be of an object, a linen object that is at least hundreds of years old. We don't know if it's 2,000 years old, but hundreds of years old. And somehow there's an image of a human being in there that has been formed by some sort of three-dimensional interaction with the body, between the body and the shroud that wrapped the body at some point in history. So it's a fascinating object, no matter what we believe. Now, very briefly, let me tell you what, if I may, Mercedes, what attracted us to begin with, and then Mercedes can fill in the bits that I will no doubt miss. What struck us was that there were reports coming through of objects and writing being detected on this amazing artifact. There's an image of a body there for sure, but other people were starting to discover, apparently, parts of the image were images of objects, and here we have some of the objects in this slide. So we have three examples. The first row, the second row, and the third row refer to three different objects that apparently were identified in the shroud. The top row, this is, so the leftmost image is part of the original shroud image, which is over here on the left pretty much in its entirety. And researchers considered that there was some sort of button or a brooch that was present in the image. And a modern day version of this would be what's on the right here. So this object, or something like it, could have a long time ago left an impression on the shroud. And it's that image that researchers were focusing on when they took pictures of the shroud and tried to analyze what was in it. So that's the first object that may be somehow embedded in the shroud. Not the object itself, just it left an image on the linen. The next object is some sort of bee. Again, if you look at the leftmost picture, that's from the original shroud, and researchers considered that the image in the middle is what is of interest. And views differ. It could have been just a bee that was unfortunately trapped all those years ago and left an image on the shroud, or maybe it was a brooch. We can't really tell. And the bottom example, the same sort of procedure. So the leftmost image is the original shroud. Researchers identified an area that they thought was of interest, and they think this was, in this case, a butterfly brooch. So perhaps on the shroud or on Jesus himself, there was some sort of butterfly ornament that left an image in the shroud all those years ago. So these are the images that researchers have been focusing on. There are a few others, but these are the most, if you like, convincing. In addition to the objects that may be reflected in the shroud, we also have the suggestion that there is writing on the shroud, and this is a famous example of the writing. So on the top here, we have the original shroud image. It's been expanded substantially. So now we're looking at the weave of the linen. As many of you will know, linen is a fairly roughly woven material, and has been used in history for a long, long time, as far as we can tell. And so what we're looking at here is a very much blown up image of part of the shroud, a part of the linen. And if you look at the top, I think it's fair to say there is kind of there are kind of letter-like shapes in there. And this got researchers thinking. And the lower image is what researchers think these shapes actually represent. We'll come back to this as we go through the papers, but maybe you can get a feel for the letters on the bottom that have been added by the researchers to kind of fill in the missing bits in the original image, which is at the top. So we've got on the left an N, an A, a Z, you can probably see where this is going, an A, maybe an R, and so on. And of course, a word like Nazarene or Nazareth would be an important word to have on an item of clothing or a shroud such as this that is linked with Jesus, because Jesus and Nazareth are closely linked for reasons that you will fully appreciate. So these images are fascinating. The problem that Mercedes and I struggled with, though, is how do we know they're really representing what we perceive them as representing? We can certainly see objects in the shroud, but are there really objects there? We can certainly get a feel for writing, but is this really writing? Or is our brain doing something to kind of fill in the gaps and to almost trick us into thinking that these objects and words really do exist? That was the start point for us. Mercedes, have I missed something out?
No, I think that's great. And I think one of the reasons that we did this was because we both come from different areas of psychology. And what we found is that oftentimes smaller disciplines inside psychology don't actually speak to each other. And so for someone who comes from a social psychology background, I'm interested in the way that people sort of see what they expect to see, and they believe in they see what they want to see, and they believe what they want to believe. And the cognitive aspect where Tim comes from really meant that we could combine our disciplines and perform this research together, which worked really well.
Great. Shall I continue with this a little bit? So as I think all of the students that we're dealing with know, or should know, when we perceive something, perceiving is not seeing. Perceiving is making sense of what your eyes are sending to your brain. We have 5 senses, but the sense we're dealing with here is vision. And your eyes and your basic visual system will be sending all that it can about the outside world. But what you actually experience, what you perceive, goes through a lot of processing. And a lot of that processing involves prediction, expectation, experience. And that's the problem. In everyday life, it works brilliantly because the brain can help you through situations rapidly, because it can guess the nature of the visual information that's coming in through your eyes and your visual system. So it can estimate that it's your friend that you're seeing, or that that's your car in front of you. Or if you're reading a sentence on a page, it can estimate the next words that are coming along with your reading from right to left or left to right. So it works brilliantly most of the time. But Mercedes and I were concerned that in archaeology, we're looking at historical artifacts. Maybe the brain was working against factual information. Maybe the brain was filling in the gaps too easily. And maybe, and I feel awkward saying this, maybe some of the things that have been reported as being on the Shroud don't actually exist. And it's the brain that's filling in the missing information to provide an illusion of objects and words. So to do this, we enlisted a number of lovely students in the UAE who, as we said to begin with, had never heard of the Shroud of Turin. And this was the first point of interest for a sociological point of view, that there is this division of knowledge in religious information across the globe, and that surprised us. But from an experimental point of view, folks, it was really useful because these students were naive students. Now, naive participants, I should say. Now, when you are doing experiments in psychology, the best students are naive. The best participants, I should say, the best participants are naive because they don't know what to expect in the experiment. And so you're using a brain that is really, free of any biases or anything like that, if you're lucky. So what we did was to run our participants from the UAE in an experiment, but we didn't want to use the Shroud of Turin, even if we could have done, because we wanted an object that was devoid of any links with religion, devoid of any links with, in this case, Jesus and Christianity and everything else. We wanted an object that was completely free of anything, objects or words in its woven form. So what we did was to use this, and this is an image of the original piece of linen that we actually used. And the linen we used in our experiment to see if participants could see writing, or in our experiments, writing in particular, the linen had been taken just from an ordinary linen shirt, which I think we report in the paper as being circa 2009, rather than circa, 2000, zero, if you like, all those years ago. So it's a very recent shirt. And just to convince you, this is the object. I'm afraid it's creased because it's been in the back of my wardrobe, but this is the linen garments that we used to produce the image that we used in the experiment. It's just an ordinary linen shirt. So we then used this image, presented it to our participants. We had 2 groups of participants, as you know. One group had been told that it was a religious garment, very important. Did we say Christianity?
Yeah, we did. Yes, we did. Yep.
So very important for Christianity. And could they detect any words on there that they thought they could see? But we encouraged them to look and to be able to, do you remember this? The participants could even draw the words they saw. They were so convinced the words were in the linen. They traced the words with a pencil. So it's pretty obvious they could perceive these words. That was one group. The other group, they were told rather naughtily, but they were told completely the opposite, that this was just an ordinary piece of linen and there was nothing special about it, but could they see any words on it of any form? And I think the data are very clear that the religious groups saw lots of religious words in the garment. Forget them, God,
Bible, Jesus.
All the ones you might expect. I think church was in there. So very religious words were perceived by the religious group, but zero religious words were perceived by the group that had been told that there was nothing of a religious nature about this particular garment. So that's the backstory. The findings are pretty clear. So in the first paper we published on this, and I think I can probably get a copy of it here. So the first paper we published,
it was in 2015.
It was indeed.
It's on the slide.
Good to know you're paying attention, Mercedes. So this is the first paper, which is pretty self-descriptive, and all the stuff is in there, which you may have read. We did 2 experiments. Both showed that if you tell people that it's a religious garment, they perceive religious words in the garment. If you don't bother mentioning this, they don't see any religious words. They see some words, I mean, like cat and house, and neutral words are fine, but they don't see anything like the huge amount of religious words that people see if they are expecting to see the words on the shroud. So that was the first paper. The second paper was dealing with objects. And this is the title which we're very proud of, aren't we, Mercedes? Believing is seeing.
Yes.
You know the phrase seeing is believing. Well, to be honest, if you believe that there's something there from a religious point of view, you are probably going to see this in this case, these objects. And this was a paper that we produced describing our views on how a religious expectation could trick, might be the right word, or the brain's normal processing could fool an observer into thinking that objects and writing were actually there on this ancient garment. Now, that's a problem if we're going to find the truth about these garments. You know, in some ways, we'd like to turn the cleverness of the brain off for a few hours so that we could actually experience the genuine information that was present in this amazing Shroud of Turin. But we can't do that. The brain just does what it does all the time and usually does a great job. But we argued that you can't be certain in this paper, you can't be certain that objects are there because the brain is going to be tricking you to predict objects, to see things that maybe don't have a physical presence in this amazing artifact.
Yeah, can I add something here too, Tim? And that is, I think, the physical nature of the shroud. You know, given its long history, it's been damaged many times in fires. It's been folded and unfolded hundreds of times. It's dirty. It's been exposed to smoke and wax, and that really forms the perfect visual noise, especially when it is digitally enhanced by photographic techniques, which actually often lose the gray tones. And so they emphasize any kind of lines that could be perceived as a writing or object. And I think we also have to remember too, is that the shroud has huge religious importance historically and for religion as well. It's really, it's very likely that there's a motivation to see what's not actually there. And so those who truly believe that it's the burial cloth of Jesus, especially since its origins can't be determined, they see it as a miracle, and this can lead them to sort of this, what we call, I think I see perception. So in the case of seeing objects, when they think they perceive an object, it enhances an already held belief that it's proof that biblical accounts of Jesus and the crucifixion were accurate and reliable. So remember, we've talked, I'm sure, for those of you I taught social psychology, both at Heriot-Watt and Ibn Haldun, we know about the confirmation bias. And so we see what we want to see, and we use that to enhance our beliefs, and it further entrenches us into to believe in what we see. And I think I'll just finish with this, a likely source of this discrepancy is the fact that non-believers and believers see the same thing very differently. And so non-believers actually fail to see the objects and writing on the shroud, whereas believers are, I suppose, motivated to see what they want to see, and they're more likely to report writing and objects with complete confidence.
That's right. The other thing to mention, which probably is in the paper, and we're very careful not to be horrible about the dedicated people that are looking for evidence of these objects and evidence of this writing. I think, Mercedes, we will both love them to be absolutely correct, because that will be fascinating, even more fascinating. It's a fascinating object anyway. But adding to what Mercedes was saying, many of these people were employed by the Vatican. Now, I'm not saying anything about their honesty, but the motivation to perceive these Jesus-related images, if you like, must have been enormous in these people. They were closely related to almost the seat of Christianity, if you like, and it will be difficult, automatically, not deliberately and consciously, but automatically it will be difficult not to have a perceptual system that really was looking for this wonderful religious evidence.
Can I add something, Hocam? As you said, it hadn't been heard in our country, or basically in other countries, but I think it's an amazing example. After reading your articles, I've noticed that there are many types of, for example, there are objects, there are inscriptions that are claimed to in there, and also human face. So it's a rich example for perception concept, I think.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny. I mean, if you read the papers and follow up on some of the references, all you need are patterns of, let's say, black and white, and your brain can make sense of them. Even if they're random patterns, people see letters, people see faces, in a piece of fruit, in a piece of toast. The examples, folks, that someone in another country took a piece of toast out of a toaster and they saw the face of Jesus Christ. And as I say to my students, it's probably not the face of Jesus Christ. It's probably just a bit of burnt toast. But the brain makes up this perception because it's good at doing that, and especially for faces. But the image of a body on this garment is, and let me take you to that image. The image of the body, I think, is amazing. Who could deny? Sometimes the evidence is too much, and the brain can't be tricking us this much. There clearly is some sort of human form there, and nobody knows how it was formed.
Well, that's right. And the people who really believe that the Shroud of Turin is real, they say the fact that science cannot explain it must mean it's a miracle. And they explain it as being a flash of light from inside, which with the heat and energy actually formed this image. And that's how they explain it. So no, it's fascinating how different people see the same thing. And that just shows how much our perception can change.
Does that answer your question?
Move on to questions if you want. And thanks for the talk, for the papers. And Ayşenur.
I have one comment and one question. First of all, it's really interesting that the interpretations are on the images, like I guess no one has seen the actual Shroud of Turin, who made these interpretations, right? They only see the images, but it's not. I mean, it's really interesting to make comments, make interpretations on the Shroud of Turin by looking at the image, right? You I guess, indicated that in your papers as well.
Yeah, I correct me if I'm wrong, Mercedes, but I think the original Shroud doesn't really look that interesting. It was only when people started taking photographs and inverting the photographs that these extra pieces of information started to show through. So if you look at the yellow form at the top, which is the, it's an image, but it's the original Shroud, you can't really see a lot in there. But then someone took photographs, and that's the lower image, and played around and inverted the images, so what was black was white and what was white was black. And suddenly this content of the Shroud jumped out. That's about right, isn't it, Mercedes?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you cannot see the image of the man with the naked eye, but the Shroud is brought out occasionally. I think the last time it was brought out for public viewing was in 2015, but because it's been damaged and they want to protect it as much as possible, they only do it every 5, 10 or 15 years. And when they do actually display it, they get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people flock to the Vatican to see it, because it's such a revered and historical piece of history, and people are very motivated to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my actual question is that if the outside world is constructed by our beliefs and cultural backgrounds, how is it possible to be sure of the objectivity of the outside world that is mainly shaped by our subjective interpretations? I mean, in this case, what's real is just a matter of perception, isn't it?
Yeah. Welcome to your world. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing now. It's just that, there's probably more information that I'm here and you're there and, you have a cup of tea or whatever, than there is information in the Shroud. But you know that the brain provides your perceptions, your experiences, and we see the world differently. I'm scared to say the blue dress, but the blue dress is an indication of how different experiences. We'll see a dress that's gold or black or blue or whatever the colors were that people saw a few years back. Remember the blue dress, everybody?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
That's your expectation. So your reality is defined by your expectations and your beliefs and your biases, perhaps. And that's the way it is. That's the way it is.
Exactly. That's why we have a difference between sensation and perception. So, we can all sense the same thing, but we perceive it very differently based on our likes, our dislikes, our culture, our religion, our gender, our age, what mood we're in. All of these things can influence everything that we perceive. And, it can be scary for some people to think about the fact that what is actually real. But I suppose what is real is how you perceive real to a certain extent.
This is all true. Yeah.
Hi, sorry guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to bring in my perspective, since I literally grew up knowing about this. So I agree completely about everything that you just spoken about, how it's a very important artifact in Italy. And I visited, I think, two times, yeah. And the thing is that in our culture, we're not even kind of supposed to argue on the fact that it's real or not. Like if I go to my grandma and ask her, do you think it's real or not? That's no question that you should bring.
Yeah.
But the thing that I've seen arising in many religious people that are young, because a lot of young people are less and less religious, but those who are religious are like, it's not important to know if it's real or not. It's about the symbol that it brings, right? But again, it perpetuates the concept that you know, something like that. Is it really real, or are we so biased and it's so ingrained in our culture that you can't even realize if it's real or not? So yeah, I would love, I actually really appreciate that somebody external, he's researching about this, because I don't think we're impartial enough to do so. But it's really interesting how our mind completes everything around us that we cannot see perfectly, or we cannot understand perfectly. And there is an explanation for this. It's really interesting to me.
So Sarah, you have actually seen the Shroud, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You could be our guest of honor. You're the one who found it. That's excellent.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, yeah, it is interesting, but maybe my feet is not big enough to be as surprised as I was, because I wasn't really impressed as much. To me, it's just a normal thing that I grew up with. So seeing it is like going to a church. You know, like you pray and that's it. Like I said, we're not even questioning the fact it's real or not. But it is very interesting, and a lot of people have argued about it. And again, if you try to argue about it, it's really difficult. And I would love, actually, a thing that I would love to see maybe in future research is if there's any personality actually trait that, you know, that actually gives us this biased perception. Or because, for instance, like I grew up in this, but I would love to see if it's real or not, even though I know it's like it's part of my culture. But am I as biased as somebody who is not growing up with this or not? It would be interesting to research that. Yeah.
The problem we experienced are two things, I think. One is that we got lots of, when the first paper was published, and also when the second one, we got lots of emails from very religious people, Catholic people, Italian people who were very irritated.
I imagine. I can only imagine.
So
I'm sorry for that.
All right. We thought maybe the mafia would visit at some point, but we survived. And one person wrote to me and said it was very interesting, but his brain didn't work the same way. His brain didn't get influenced by his expectations. So why did we bother doing the research? So that's what we're up against, if you understand what I'm saying. People who are denying the way the brain of all of us works, that we have these expectations and these perceptions which have an effect on what we experience. That was one thing. The other thing is the dating of the garments. The dating of the garment should be going back, let's say, 2,000 years. Are we all agreed on that? If it was real, it should be over 2,000 years old. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they tried carbon dating. You know, carbon dating, you have this technique and you can tell how old it is. And for reasons which we cannot understand, the carbon dating, which was done by 3 different universities, I think, including Oxford and other universities, they took the wrong piece of the garment. It was repaired. We all know it was repaired in the 1500s or 1400s because it caught fire. You know, people didn't look after it very well. It caught fire and some nuns repaired it. And the carbon dating was conducted on the repaired pieces. And they came up with the date that we all knew existed, which was in the 1400s or 1500s. Yes, we know that. Why didn't you go to the original pieces and carbon date that? So I don't know what's happening. We don't know, but there seems to be a straightforward way, at least, Sarah, to take the garment back to about the right time in history when it should have been used, if it is the real thing. But it hasn't been done yet.
Absolutely. I agree. I know about this. And that is why it's very troubling. The fact that the Vatican has been manipulating much of the education and these things for centuries. That is my problem with,
Right.
personally, that's me, my personal opinion. My personal opinion about the religion of Christianity, that's a problem. When the religion is not anymore religion, is not anymore spirituality, it's more about the actual things, which is wrong, which is that it taints, it makes the religion something that is not, and it's horrible. And people who argue, still argue about this is very, very wrong. And yeah, so researching about this is very complicated. Also, for instance, like in recent years, I don't know if you know about this debate that the Bible doesn't mean what it actually says. A lot of things that are translated from the Bible, because they have been translated from so many different languages, so it's not directly from Latin to Italian or Latin. It's been in Aramaic and the ancient Greek, right? So a lot of things don't mean what they actually mean. And it's been a lot of recent debates about this. And the thing that I think is important is what message you want to carry on. Like that's not important. What the message on your religion you want to carry. You can't deny that there has been so many translations. And so you cannot be sure that what is written is what they meant. But what is the message important? That's the message that is important. What's the message of Christianity and whatever? Sorry, I talked a lot. Yeah.
But would people that you know be worried if the shroud was dated only, let's say, way back to the 15th or 14th century? Would that change the way in which devout Christians saw this garment, or would they just think, well, who cares? It's still something that is meaningful to us?
Again, I think in the recent youth, and probably even my parents, they would be like, we don't care much. But if you ask my grandmas or all the people in the Vatican, it would be a great loss, because they have been sustaining something for centuries and now it's not real. And again, the economical value of this, we cannot even go through that fact, how much money has been raised because of this. So it would be a great loss. That's why they're very much interested, they sustain this image. But I wouldn't be too much worried. It's very interesting. I would like to know the truth. But I wouldn't be shocked or no, my entire life has been upside down, because that's the new generation. Hopefully it will be like me,
Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you want, we can move on to another question. And also, actually, the experiences are really important for us to hear from the native Italian. So thanks again. And there's a question from Emine. If you want, Emine, you can turn your microphone on and you can ask directly.
Sure. Yeah.
First of all, hi, both of you. Professor, you said that believers and non-believers see differently. Is that mean? I mean, you said that believing is creating our perception and our seeing. My question is that does believing belong to seeing, or maybe non-believing belong to seeing? I mean, maybe believing something open our eyes and seeing it in a real sense, maybe. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Mercedes, do you want to pick this up?
No, I think I'll leave that one with you, Tim.
Okay. I think you have a point, Emine. I think you have a point. I don't have an answer. It seems to me that this might be another experiment that we should conduct. I mean, the way in which this area will develop is that people will stand on our shoulders and do the next experiment. We already have, we were talking earlier, there's at least one more experiment that needs to be done. And maybe what you've just said can be looked at from a scientific perspective, and we can either reveal what you've said as having something to it, or maybe suggest that isn't the influence. But I think it's a really interesting point, and I don't know if Heber's still here, but Heber is in many ways my Islamic advisor. Can I call you that, Heber? I will do anyway. So she tells me about things that are Islamic, and I learn about this. I don't know if it affects me in any way, but I learn about it. And one argument is that if you believe in something, you can see it for what it is. Now, as what's called an empiricist, I'm not totally convinced by that. I need some more evidence that, for example, that there is a God and all of this important stuff. But I do take your point that maybe if someone believes in Christianity, believes in Jesus Christ and the whole, if I can call it the whole story, maybe they then have a greater sensitivity and can perceive the things that mere non-believers or agnostics like me, means I don't know, we just don't see those things. So I think that's an interesting perspective. But being a scientist, I would want to put that idea into an experiment, and we could find out objectively if there is something to that, or maybe it's not quite right. And I don't know what that experiment would be, but it would be an interesting one, whatever it was. I think it's an interesting point, Emine. Thank you.
Thank you too.
And I think I'd also add as well is that we often ignore information that doesn't go along with our expectations. And so it's not that it's blocked, it's just we don't actually pay attention to it. And so if we're not attending to it, then we don't recognize it. And I think another thing, Sarah asked before about whether it's personality based, but there is quite a lot of evidence from the literature is that people who believe strongly in the supernatural, that doesn't necessarily mean religion, but it's also religious people. So some people believe in ghosts and spirits and things like that, but also religious people have been shown to have a perceptual bias to over detect the presence of religious or supernatural things. And so if I'm somebody who strongly believes in spirits and ghosts, I'm more likely to hear things or see things giving me a sign than somebody who doesn't. So even when there is nothing present, they're still more likely to say or to perceive an image or sound or something like that because they believe so strongly in it. So a lot of it is what we attend to, but also there are, as the paper says, believing is seeing. We actually really do perceive the things we want to see. And a lot, yeah, it's very interesting. And we don't, I give this example in my class, and it's not about the shroud, but when people say that women are bad drivers, we've all heard women are bad drivers, right? So when a person's driving down the road, let's say a man is driving the road and they see a man who's had an accident by the side of the road, they don't say, oh, there's a man. I always thought that women were bad drivers. Maybe I'm wrong. No, they just ignore it. But if it's a woman they see, they go, women drivers. And so we very much choose what we attend to, what we encode, and what we remember. So that's why our lives or our perceptions are also different, because we see the world very differently.
That's very sexist against men. What you just
and that's why social psychology is so interesting, because that's what we look at.
But the other, Emine, can I come back to your point? Again, it's still one to be thought about deeply. But
Okay.
here's the tricky thing. If what you say is correct, how can I put this? If you assume that the shirt that I showed you, the shirt that I bought from a shop, has no religious connections, has no religious imprinting, writing, anything like that, why would people still perceive that if it wasn't really there? So I could argue, just for fun, that the sensitivity of the religious group, the group that we said were being shown a religious garment, would increase their religious sensitivity, and they, in inverted commas, saw words in this piece of linen, but there aren't really any words there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I get the point. Thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, we can talk about this another time.
Okay.
At this point, I'd like to ask another question. It's kind of related to this. In the past, we know that religion or religious thinking was more dominant. But nowadays, the different ideologies, different thinking systems are quite dominant. For example, feminism or Marxism. How about doing these experiments with certain types of groups? I don't know, maybe feminists can see or might see the different objects, but I know just, I wonder, is there any study, or it could be, because they also affect our perception process, I think, like the religion.
That's a really neat idea. I mean, I would, sorry to say this, I'm guessing you're burning to come in here, but can I just say, yeah, I would love to have two groups of people. Let me use your example, feminists and non-feminists, let's say, all females are feminists and non-feminists. So could it be the case that if we showed them ambiguous images, they would perceive things that were more aligned with their beliefs? But yeah, I think there's a lot in this technique, and other people have used similar techniques where you show an ambiguous image. I mean, Rorschach, most of you have heard of the Rorschach tests, where you have ink blots and people will see images in the ink blots. In a way, the back of my shirt was a Rorschach test, wasn't it? We were seeing what people thought was there, but it wasn't really there. Mercedes, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're sort of, well, it's like we also in clinical psychology they use that as a it's called a projective test, that you're projecting yourself onto whatever that ambiguous stimuli is, and tell a story, or what you see says a lot about what your belief system is, according to clinical psychologists. But it is used, this kind of Rorschach and that kind of using ambiguous stimuli is used a lot in a lot of different areas of psychology, not just experimental, but also clinical and counseling.
Do you know if anything has been done using ambiguous images, Mercedes, and gender beliefs? I don't know what the term would be. So being feminist or whatever the opposite is, and heterosexual, homosexual, all of these non-binary folk that we have in our world. No,
not that I'm aware of, and I read a lot about research using looking at gender, and it's not that I've seen. So this could be something that we could certainly look at. And we're lucky that we have two different cultural contexts. We have the UAE and we have Turkey. So it would be a really good opportunity to see, what might happen there. But absolutely, I mean, even just, it doesn't need to have to be ambiguous stimuli. So if you see, let's see, if you see a man speaking to a woman, a feminist might see that as being very insulting or very, bossy, whereas a non-feminist would just see it as a normal. So our perceptions shape everything, not just visual stimuli, but also, the world around us, when we watch a movie, when we see people talking, when we see people behaving, we're always sort of pushing our perceptions and how we see that behavior.
Okay, thank you. And we can move on to another questions from another Zehra.
Okay, I'm starting to speak. First of all, thank you both of you. It is going great. I have a question regarding the language and its influence on our perception. So, Professor, you have mentioned in your paper that illusory letters phenomenon have been found in other languages different than Latin. Is the illusory letters phenomenon an observation for Arabic stimuli other than Latin language an indication of the universality of expectation-based perceptions? It is probably the case, but do you think that the language will be a permanent influence in the context of illusory perception, considering the cultural and religious background of a language? I have written my question to the chat. You can look at it and you can understand better what I'm saying here.
You want to tell everyone what the illusory letters phenomenon is? Could you do that? Or shall I do that? No, okay.
You are the professor, not me.
That's a good point.
It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question, Fatma.
It is a very good question. The illusory letters phenomenon, which is an amazing illusion shows in English and in Arabic, and we have to do it in Turkish, of course, but it shows that if you just put 2 letters on the screen, just 2 letters on the screen, or in fact in the wall of an office, and I will, when we all go back to the campus, I will put the illusion on my wall and everyone can experience it. If you have just 2 letters, let me use English. So D and K from dark. So when the sun goes down, it gets dark. D and K from dark. If I just put dashes, so little horizontal, that's not true, diagonal lines between D and K, people will perceive a complete word, dark. They see 4 letters. They would bet their life that there were 4 letters there. Now, that is an illusion, obviously, because there are only 2 letters there, the first and last letters. And the reason we did this was we know that the first and last letters of words, it may seem strange to you, but these are the biggest indicators of the identity of the word. So we read from the outside in. When you look at a word on the screen now, you're actually identifying words that are fairly short. I mean, maybe the longer words, if there's one there, well, maybe writing and problems, but the other shorter words, you will process them from the outside inwards. And so once you've seen D and K, your brain is expecting dark and duck and all the other deck and all the other words that fit. So you do experience, you perceive the full word, the complete word. And we found this in both Arabic and in English. So this is the illusory letters phenomenon, because the letters that we see are illusions.
I should point out, Tim, that the participants they didn't have the paper in front of them. They stood, what, about 6 feet away?
Yeah, we had to get the presentation conditions just right, because everyone has a slightly different visual system. So what we did was simply move people forwards or backwards. So we got the right visibility of the stimuli, and then they got the illusion. But that was just to overcome differences in the vision of people. Now, Zaira, your question went on to ask me something more. Can you remind me what the point of this is? You said, is it a cultural thing? Did you say the illusory letters phenomenon? Is that correct?
It is basically whether the language and its cultural and religious background has an influence on our perception of the outside world.
Of the outside letters, do you mean?
Yes.
The world.
In the context of illusory letters phenomenon.
Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, it's the same place. It's fine.
Do
you want me to repeat it?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So, do you think that the language will be a prominent influence in the context of illusory perception, considering the cultural and religious background of a language?
I don't know. So you weren't talking about the illusory letters phenomenon?
Yes.
You were or you weren't?
I was talking about illusory letters phenomenon.
Okay. So do I think that a cultural background will affect the illusory letters phenomenon, or?
Yes, this is basically what I'm asking, because like illusory letters, to have the illusory letters phenomenon, first we need a language, as I know, right?
That is true. Yeah, you need to, because the exterior letters will produce your expectation.
Yes.
So in that sense, the exterior letters, the first and last letters of a 4-letter word, are kind of like the expectations that are produced in our religious group, where we told them this is a religious garment, and they then expected, and their perceptual system cooperated with those expectations. That's interesting. With the Shroud of Turin experiment, we created an expectation which was deliberate and conscious. The participants were aware that they should be looking for religious words in the document. But with the illusory letters phenomenon, it's automatic. It's just part of the way in which you process words on the page. So one is conscious and the other one is implicit and automatic, and if you like, unconscious.
Okay, I got my answer. Thank you so much. I understand right now.
Okay, good. Okay, good question. Very thought-provoking question.
Professor, another question is, your population in the experiments was has no Christian background culturally, right?
As
That's
far
right.
as we know, yeah, they're very. They were all female. They were all Muslim students at the university we were both at the time, and I mean, you know, very very committed students. Sorry, very committed Muslims. So, you know, praying and following very much the Muslim way of life. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think that if there will be a change if the population has a different religious and cultural background? Do you think that would be the case?
Yeah. I mean, listening to Sarah earlier, the student from Italy, from Turin, I would imagine, and I think Mercedes would agree with me, and I'll shut up in a minute and let Mercedes talk, but if we ran this experiment in a highly religious Christian country like Italy, I would imagine we get millions of words that were perceived on the back of my shirt, because there'd be this extra perceptual influence where that, you know, these folk would actually experience these words because of their heightened belief. And it's good to know Sarah agrees with that. So the group that we used, the wonderful non-Christian Muslim people who hadn't even heard of the Shroud of Turin, they were, if we found the effect with them, we'll find it with anybody, is what I'm saying, because they had no interest in this. They were just seeing these words because they thought they were there. But a more evolved member of the world's community, I think, would have seen even more words.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Tim.
And is it like the conducting this experiment on the students has any change on the results, any influence on the results? For example, if you conduct this research on general society, would it change the results?
Don't know. That's what we call an empirical question, and that means the only answer can be discovered by doing the experiment.
Yeah.
To see if it is what you suspect. My guess would be, I suppose you could find people that just weren't interested, and so therefore wouldn't perceive any of the religious words. Mercedes, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. The answer is we don't know. Yeah, it's something that we can look at, but I wouldn't even be able to guess. It would be interesting to do it in other religions, but you know, for example, I'm partly Canadian, and if I think Canadians in general are not very religious, and so I wouldn't expect to see much influence of their being told that this is a piece of linen that had important religious provenance. I don't think that would actually be enough to inspire any illusory perceptions of religious words. So I think there would definitely be a difference, and much fewer words found in a non-religious context. But I mean, but this can also be done. It doesn't have to be religious. It could also be, you know, other things. It doesn't have to be a religious item. But of course, for this, I mean, actually, Tim hasn't said this, but he was actually on the National Geographic program. And there's a video of him on what's it called, National Geographic, or?
No, it's the Smithsonian Institute.
Yeah. So he was actually interviewed, and then when he came over to the UAE, we were discussing this, and that's really what inspired this. But we could have done it, and we could have done the same kind of experiment in many different ways. It didn't have to be about this, but this is what inspired it. Tim's TV appearance. You can YouTube it. I think it's available on YouTube. If I find it, I will. I'll send it to you.
Mercedes, behave. Come on now. Yeah. So the questioner, what do you think? What do you think? What's your answer to your question?
About the first one, I agree with you, but the second one, I'm not sure. Like the students, maybe are they psychology students, by the way, or in different areas?
I think Mercedes, can you remember?
They were a mix of, they were all undergraduate students, but they were a mix. They weren't all psychology students.
Yeah.
I don't know, if I was a student who participated in this kind of experiment, I would be more aware of the situation, and I would be, I don't know, more careful in the experiment. But another, like, ordinary people in the general society, they may not be aware of the experiment. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a good lesson for everyone, all the students listening to this, and that is that you have to be careful when choosing your population for experiments, because you can get false information. The students we taught, again, my recollection is that they weren't psychology students, but if they were, I can't remember what time of year we ran this, but they would not have known about perceptual processes. They would not have known about how the brain does this, because that would have ruined everything. But again, let me emphasize, the experiment, even though it was very simple, this is what we call a paper and pencil experiment, folks. So we showed them a paper printout of my shirt, basically, and they just had to write down the words that they thought they could see. It's a simplest of simple experiments, zero costs and really great results. But don't forget that when they were told, the group that was told that there was no religious connection, they saw no religious words. So yeah, it's quite a clean experiment in that respect, that seeing no religious words in the non-religious condition and seeing lots of them in the religious condition suggests that it was driven by religious expectations in one group, but this was absent in the other group. They had zero religious words in their responses.
But they still all had an expectation that there were words in there. And that's the important thing, is that the context here is that there are words, you just need to find them. And of course, those who were primed with the religious context, that's what they found. And don't forget, participants are often, they're very helpful. They want to give you what you want, which is why it's better to use naive participants, because if a participant is guessing what the experiment is about, they are more likely to sort of demonstrate the behavior or give you the responses that they think you want, rather than their actual responses. So it's very important to, as Tim said, choose your participants very carefully. But in this case, it was simply just the expectation that there was something there. We didn't say there may or may not be words here, see if you can find them. Probably we would have had much fewer words reported, but we said, this is it has words in it. What can you see? And that expectation creates this kind of this false impression that there were actually words there. I mean, some of the words were a huge F and a small A and a big R, and so they didn't actually make sense. But following the lines of the linen, when you magnify it and exaggerate the tones, you can actually, I could find words in there too. To be some of the time, where is that piece of linen, Tim?
But here it is.
The next one. No, that's the next one, I think.
Well, this is the one with the word. This is the one with the
no,
words.
I mean R1, the one that we used in the experiment.
In my shirt.
Yes, your shirt.
There it is.
Yeah. So, that this is only a small image of it, but, it was exaggerated, and you can see the lines, and you can see how quite easily you can actually find words if you are determined to find them.
The problem with linen, as you quite rightly say, the problem with linen, it's got quite coarse threads, and you can see them here. And that's obviously a great start point for people to see letters and objects, because it's almost as if there are random lines already in there, and the creases as well, which we kept in because we were trying to produce something that was a bit like the Shroud of Turin, which has got lots of threads and has got lots of creases. It's been around for at least 500 years, maybe longer. So this is a great image to trick the brain into thinking that things might be there, but you only trick the brain if you suggest things may be there, and then the brain takes over.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Let me ask another question from our participants. The question is, as you indicate in your classes, that the knowledge that we have about our biological brain is mostly gained through the empirical studies conducted on animals. How about perceptual processes of animals of the outside world? do we have any information about their perception which might be similar to ours?
Very good. I don't think I ever said that most of our knowledge is gained from animals. I mean, it depends what knowledge we're talking about, but I would suspect that most of our knowledge is gained from humans, but not using the techniques that are used on animals because that would be legal on humans. But yes, there are. So there have been some amazing experiments. I'm not happy to say, but on primates, on monkeys and apes. The argument being that these are closer to the human condition, which is good and bad if you think about it, because if an animal is closer to humans, it's even more morally awkward and arguably unacceptable to do those experiments because they're very close to what we are. But they are, on the other hand, more appropriate to find out about how humans function. If I can use this example, it's from a colleague and a friend in Marseille in France, Jonathan Granger, Mercedes, and he and his group wanted to find out if non-linguistic animals, so monkeys and apes don't have language, they don't. They have communication systems. We can train them to point at objects. You'll have seen maybe these things in TV programs where chimps appear to be able to communicate in a language, but it's not really language, it's just very sophisticated communication. But what Jonathan Granger and colleagues did was to, I forget the primates involved. It may well have been a rhesus monkey or a baboon, I'm not sure. And they didn't do anything cruel to the animal. Well, they didn't do anything invasive, but they presented it with groups of letters that were familiar groups of letters in real words. So it was done in French, but in English, for example, groups of letters that we see a lot would be, I'm looking at the screen now, so E and D, which finishes many words in English, and A and N, and P and O, and all of the other kind of subgroups that you see as groups of letters within words. And you can also get illegal groups of letters. So X, J, Q doesn't appear in any word. R, Z, J is another group you'd never see in any word in English. And what they found was that monkeys could learn the groups of letters when they were shown them as familiar objects, and they responded to these groups of letters when they appeared in real words. Now, what this means is that the brains of these non-linguistic animals could detect groups of letters that were repeated and became familiar to them, and they could press buttons more quickly for these stimuli, that for words that happen to be, but these stimuli that contain these familiar letter groups. So monkeys were developing a brain system whereby they could make more sense, process more easily familiar groups of letters than they could unfamiliar groups of letters. Now, that's not saying that the animals knew what they were doing. They didn't recognize a French word and say, oh, Paris, wonderful. No, they didn't do that. But they were learning, their brain was learning the familiarity of groups of letters, and it was processing these letters more easily when they were shown in the context of real words. So that does, I think, come to answer your question slightly, in that it shows that when the brains of even non-human primates are shown familiarity, are shown objects that become more and more familiar in their world, they will then process and perceive these objects more fluently, because they are predicting them from their previous experiences in this experiment.
Professor, thank you. Actually, I have a question a bit related to this.
Okay.
The perception process. How about some people who have protopagnosia or neglect, basically, their perception process? Because we know that it's interpretation of our what we perceive from our senses, the perception process. But there's a problem with our senses, basically, or not senses, actually, in our brain. For example, if our brain damaged right hemisphere. So I just wonder what's going to happen if these kind of people try to perceive something. Does it affect their perception process, or? You
bet. I mean, just to remind everyone, so prosopagnosia is the loss of normal ability to recognize faces. And there are various parts of the brain that are associated with face recognition. A big part is the right hemisphere for most people, but other parts of the brain are involved too. And one part of this, I mean, there are lots of different types of prosopagnosia. There are lots of different types, lots of different causes for any loss of normal psychological ability. It can be many, many different parts of the brain. One or two of these would produce an effect that looks similar. And that's one reason, folks, why we need more knowledge of the biology of the brain, because people could have the same external disability, but there may be lots of different reasons across different people why the same behavior was produced. So that's why we need to know more about the biological basis of these deficits, of these impairments. But yes, one problem is that if your visual cortex, which you all know is in the occipital lobe, the back of the brain, if that is working perfectly normally, that's great. But if it then feeds its information about color and lines and angles and edges to other parts of the brain for interpretation, for perception, and this might include even the frontal lobes of the brain, if things aren't working properly, you may have a perfectly normal visual system. You may get all of the information you would normally need to recognize your wife, if you're a husband, but you would never do that because the part of the brain that was bringing together this information from your basic visual cortex and making sense of it, if you like, your perceptual system, isn't working properly. So your visual perception could be 100%, but your experience could be completely destroyed because of these later processes of putting together basic information and making sense out of what your senses are providing.
Yes, Professor. Thank you. But seems interesting. Yeah, and some part of brain is working and another part. So.
Well, this is our prefrontal lobe conversation that we were going to have, isn't it?
Yeah, I want to go deep, but is conscious and unconscious perceptual processes a bit confusing, but hopefully I can learn more.
Of course you can, but remember, everybody, that the brain, the two things, the brain does have different parts that provide different abilities. But generally speaking, the brain works together as a unified unit. So face recognition, yeah, as I always say, is reliant on lots of processing in the in the right temporal lobe. But other parts of the brain will be contributing to your perception of faces. It's just that these little bits aren't the same as the major part of the brain over here. But if these other bits aren't working, your ability to recognize faces will be affected slightly. So it's best to regard the brain as a unified whole with different areas doing different jobs, but these all communicate with each other.
Exactly, Professor. How amazing we have, amazing brain we have.
We do indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I could say it correctly. Anyway, Ayşenur, I believe you have a question.
Before that, I guess Ramazan has a question, right?
Yeah, like we talked about so much about naive participants. What's the method you use to pick on the naive participants? Like,
that's a very good question, and I'll pass this over to Mercedes. Mercedes, we haven't heard from you for a while.
Well, naive participants are normally, if you're doing an experiment in psychology, a naive participant would be somebody who hasn't studied psychology at all. And so they're not aware of, all the things that we've talked about today. So you would screen participants out for those who've studied psychology is probably basically the most fundamental way of doing it. Yeah, I mean, for those of you who've seen the Milgram experiment, have you seen the Milgram experiment?
Mm-hmm.
It's been when people have tried to replicate it, because so many people are aware of it, it doesn't actually, the experiment doesn't actually work anymore because so many people are aware. They're not influenced by any of the commands to give higher shocks because they say, look, I know this is an experiment. So you just have to choose your participants wisely and take great care of ensuring that they meet the inclusion criteria. So in our case, it would be somebody who has not taken a psychology course.
And there are other techniques. So with the Milgram experiment, folks, just out of interest,
Sorry?
I don't know how to put the question. Do you know, Ramazan, you're a fine example. Do you know the Milgram experiment?
Yeah, prison experiment, yeah.
So were you taught this in the Haldon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. The other way to get around this is to use techniques in psychology that are implicit, that are outside of the control or the knowledge of the participants. Mm-hmm. And there are some nice techniques around that you can use to do that. So that's a way around the problem of having naive people. Even if they're not naive, they can't do anything to distort the data that you're getting from their brain, basically. But I mean, you've hit upon a good point. And related to that is, if you have a group of individuals, how do you generalize from that group to the rest of the population? And if it's not the rest of the population, which bits does it generalize to? I mean, that's always an issue in human psychology.
Yeah. Like, okay, fine. Thank you. Right. Thank you both. No, like, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna ask a question, but I think it would be somehow a bit more on researching in experiments rather than this particular experiment. So maybe hopefully another time we'd have the chance to talk on that.
All right, no problem.
So I have one question. Maybe it will be a bit different, but I think the patients of schizophrenia, they see things, for example. Is it related to what they see is related to their perception, or is it just only related to their illnesses?
Is there a prize at the end of this for the person who asks the most difficult questions? Because you will win.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to say that we don't yet fully know, and that's true. And there could be a number of possibilities. One which I raised in the third year cognition class, and it's a suggestion. We don't know yet if it's accurate, but it could be. Let's stick with vision. It could be that the illusory hallucinations that certain schizophrenic patients have, they may be due to enhanced imagery. Now, do you know what imagery is?
Like visuals?
Well, if I asked you to think about the shortest route from your house to the nearest supermarket, and to think about it in your brain, you would probably come up with a visual image, and you would walk out the front door, and you'd find your way. That's imagery, and you can do it with sound. If I asked you to imagine your favorite piece of music, you could create an auditory image in your brain, and so on and so on. So it could be the case, we don't know, but it could be the case that hallucinations are a reflection of someone's superior ability to create images. So you know that when you image a shop supermarket, you know you're not really there. You know that the image isn't so clear that you're fooled into thinking you're there. But we know that some people, particularly visual designers, artists who paint, architects, these people seem to have greater levels of imagery. And you can see why. Because if you're an architect, you can image the building that you want to build. If you're a painter, you can image the picture before you paint it, and so on. So maybe these people and others like them are more likely to have hallucinations because of their increased abilities to produce really very sharp imagery, which the rest of us don't produce as sharply. It's just there as a useful tool to get through everyday life.
Okay, thank you.
The other, can I just follow that up? The other thing, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but the other thing is that there's been some wonderful research. I think we covered this in first year with schizophrenics. And schizophrenics will often report hearing voices. They have auditory hallucinations. And for many years, it was regarded, like so many mental health issues, in a terrible way. And these people were abused and treated as bad people. And of course, they're not. They just have a mental health issue. But the auditory hallucinations that people hear, like voices, and God told me to kill this person, these sorts of things, when these occur and the patient is put into an fMRI scanner, there is activity in the auditory cortex. Now that suggests that these patients could really hear these voices. You know, they hear these hallucinations, these voices from God, and there is activation in their auditory cortex, which is what you would expect if they were really hearing these voices.
But Tim, isn't there also brain activity in the part of the brain that produces speech? And so isn't the evidence that the people who have auditory hallucinations are not only hearing voices, but they're actually producing those voices? So they're hearing something and they're saying something, but it's all inside their heads. That's what, from my understanding, but the vernix and the Broca area. I
think there are two different types of hallucination. One is activity in both Wernicke's and Broca's areas, and one is activation in Wernicke's. So often the case, we as researchers try to keep things simple, and that's the best way, isn't it, to keep things straightforward. But so often, and our conversation now has highlighted this, there are subgroups, and there'll be subgroups of the subgroups, and it becomes a bigger, complicated picture, which is often more difficult to work with. So the best thing to do is to keep it simple, and if that works, it works. But if it requires more detail and more complexity, well, that's the way nature has it.
Can I ask something related to that?
Yep.
So if you told about the, brain activation, auditory activation of the brain, as if they really hear something. So was it the case in the Shroud of Turin? Did their brain gets activated when they think that they saw something on the Shroud of Turin? Did you look at it?
Did we look at what? Did we have fMRI scans of people looking at the brain?
Yeah.
Unfortunately not.
No. We had a paper and pencil.
But wouldn't it be better, having a fMRI scan of their brain?
Yeah, that's a neat idea. So if we can I stick with language because it's just easier for me to think of. So for example, the top image here, the top image on this diagram is the original image from the Shroud of Turin. If we showed that to people, and if they really thought there was a word there, yes, you're right, we would find activation presumably in the left hemisphere of these people, and it would suggest to us that they really were experiencing a word there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good idea.
Can I ask a question, maybe last or before the last one? I'm gonna try to keep it simple.
Good.
We have studied the group pressure conformity effect on social psychology class, and luckily with Dr. Mercedes. So my question is, can we interpret this situation related to this? It's kind of, many people, and like your student Sarah said, many people believe this. It could be, could it be like a conformity? Because others say this, and it's belong to Turin, or it's exact Shroud of Turin, and there are some objects or there are some inscriptions on there. So can we interpret in this way?
I think absolutely 100%. And I think to some extent, there's almost a pressure where people say, if you're not religious enough, you won't see them. You won't see the inscriptions or you won't see the images. And so there's a pressure on people, if they don't see it, there's this pressure that if they don't, that if they don't actually see it, they will probably still say that they do see it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of areas of social psychology come into what we're talking about today. And I think conformity is a big part of it. And it's like we talked about it when we talked about conformity in the social psychology class, we may say we're going along with something, and when we start acting that way, we start to believe it as well. And so our beliefs, our actions and our beliefs catch up to each other eventually, otherwise we experience cognitive dissonance. So absolutely conformity, and I think confirmation bias and the belief perseverance phenomena, all of these things come together and help to explain what we're talking about today. And I think hopefully you as students will see that two very different areas of psychology, like social psychology and cognitive psychology, can come together and investigate the same question and improve the science by both contributing to that. I think, would you agree, Tim?
Absolutely. And I think I've said to some students that the best way to make advances in any science, but we're dealing with psychology, is to bring together two otherwise different areas. And this may sound crazy, but I can tell you that people who study vision would never talk to people who study social psychology. People who study hearing would never talk to people who study social psychology. And that's not because social psychologists are horrible people, they're lovely people, but there just seems to be this wall between them. And you can't work out how the brain works if you keep having these divisions in the groups of researchers that are trying to provide the answers. So the trick is to join up otherwise different areas, and anything can happen when you do that.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree. And it's even sometimes in psychology, even different disciplines within psychology even use different words to describe the same thing. And so we're very lucky that we found this collaboration where we can add our sort of come from our different backgrounds and look at the same thing from a different perspective.
And our latest, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say our latest collaborator is Ebru.
Yes.
So we are building on lots of things, including an enormous, intelligent Turkish perspective.
Absolutely.
So I guess we're out of questions.
I can ask one more.
Okay.
So like, I think there was a similar question asked like this before, but until what extent can perceptions affect the way we see reality? Like, I mean, I'd like to know more about that based on studies you have read or other real life experiences.
I didn't get the question, Ramazan. Tell me again.
Until what extent can perceptions that we have affect the way we see reality based on other studies conducted or other real life experiences you have had? Could you?
Well, perception equals experience equals our own reality. So perception is all that you ever experience. That is perception.
What I mean with what I mean with real life experience, I mean objectivity. That's what I would like to say.
Well, that's very interesting because, of course, nothing is really. If I played a piece of music now, as many people as there are in the room, we are going to perceive that piece of music differently. And we may objectively say it's loud or it's quiet or it has a sound of G note or F note, but we're not going to perceive it the same way because we all have our own individual likes and dislikes, and we have our own histories, and we have our own moods and gender and all those things. And so I understand what you're trying to say in terms of what is objective, but even if you look at, if you look at Trump, if you look at the difference between Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters, they can see the same, they can hear the same argument, they can see the same sentence, and they will not perceive it the same way because they have their own biases, they have their own ideas, ideologies, race, all prejudices. And so we can never take those away because, when we see the world, we have a lot of different lenses on, and we probably wear, I would say, 10 different lenses when we see the world. So we have our gender, our age, our mood, our religion, our educational background. All of these things affect what we see. And so I'd almost argue that there's no such thing as objectivity. Or maybe that's too harsh, I don't know. But I mean, even just, we can read a book and have these different interpretations. So yeah, it's a great question, but I think it's one that's probably almost impossible to answer.
I agree with all of that. And it is an excellent question now that I've understood what you were saying, Ramazan. I think there is objectivity, and that is called the physics of the world in which we live. So if I can get back to vision for a second, I can show you visual displays which contain vertical bars, and you will not perceive the vertical bars as being different from each other. But physically, I can show you on a screen with a light detector that some of the bars are lighter than the other bars. So physically, there are different bars there. And you could say that's the objective world out there. But what we call psychophysics, and that is an area of psychology, how the brain uses these physical differences and maintains them or loses them. Psychophysically, visually, we don't perceive these objective differences, and that's our subjective experience. Now that's just bars on a screen. If you multiply that up to everyday life, walking to the shops, God knows what your subjectivity would change compared to your objective real world environment.
Yeah, like when thinking on that, it's, I mean, I'm at least I'm more talking about about this like on a social psychology perspective, on which I'm more interested. It's like on the, I mean, when you go deep on that, I don't know, I think you can even see people do and act very, I don't know, like go to a point which maybe would be hard to imagine, I would say. So yeah, it's interesting to see how much people can be affected by certain things. Thank you anyway for the answer, both of you.
Okay,
you're welcome. Welcome. But I think just extending that, people in life have done, do very unexpected things, and a lot of that is because the way they perceive the world, it's different from the way that you or I perceive it, and they, based on their beliefs and their perceptions, they act in a way that would be horrific to us, but they believe it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. One more time.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for this great discussion. It was really great to have you, both of you, and our friends also are writing on chat their thanks for the discussion. And personally, actually, in the very beginning, was not strange or weird to see social psychology and neuropsychology or cognitive psychology together. So I believe that it already broadened our horizons for our future. So I hope we could do what you are talking about, the collaboration, in terms of collaboration, or to broaden our horizons. Yes, at the end of the day, we are so lucky to have both of you and both subfield of psychology, basically. Okay, if you want to add anything, you could, or we can end of the meeting.
I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege, and I really enjoyed it, and very happy to do this again as often or as frequently as you would like to, because we have a lot of things we've published together, so we can discuss all of them.
Absolutely, there are a lot of publications, so and great publications. We hope we can do it again, this kind of discussions, meetings.
Thank you very much.
well, it was lovely to see you all again. I guess I'll see most of you in a couple of days. And thank you, Sarah, and anybody else who came from Heriot Watt. It was lovely to have you involved in the discussion. And I mean, Mercedes hasn't said this, but it's events like this run by students for students that really help it make it worthwhile. And we enjoy every millisecond of these experiences. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Thank you, dear professors. It was really a nice experience to discuss these topics with you. It was
And
really
it was first with you, the program, article analysis program. It was first with you. So it was our pleasure, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great.
Bye, everybody. See you all soon, I hope.
See you, folks.
so.
Bye. And thank you,
Bye.
Sarah, for your contribution. We're the only person that's seen the Shroud of Turin.
I think she might have gone.
Thank you so much for letting me speak about this.
There she is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great.
Thank you so much for speaking about this, really. Especially, I wouldn't have expected such a topic to be researched, and I'm very, very glad it was. But yes, have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the organizers.
Yes, I did a wonderful job. Very good hosts.
Excellent. Well done. See you soon. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.